Pele leaned in and said something to Freddie.
Don't let them change you. Keep working on what makes you different and what makes you special. It was great advice, but it caused me some problems.
But what could change Freddie Adu?
Soccer is going to explode, and it's going to be around this kid.
We were the Beatles. Everywhere we went, it was the Freddie Show.
And with that came the expectation, and with that came the pressure.
New episodes of American Prodigy drop Tuesdays from Blue Wire Podcasts.
What is up, Hardwood Knocks listeners? I am Dan Favale, coming at you without my fantastic co-host this time, Adam Frommel. I am excited to get back to our team Lookahead train. We took a brief break so that we could do our win total projections relative to the over-under. If you've not checked out that pod, please do so. It was a lot of fun as per usual. This time we're going to be talking all things Cleveland Cavaliers and San Antonio Spurs. For the Cavs, I've brought on Justin Rowan. He co-hosts the Chase Down Pod, which is a part of the Blue Wire Podcast Networks. Follow him at Cavsanada. That's at Cavsanada. Then for the Spurs, we will be speaking with Paul Garcia. He covers the NBA and the Spurs for Project Spurs and analyzing the league. Follow him on Twitter at Paul Garcia NBA, spelled exactly as it sounds. Excited to talk to them. Before we get started, though, just another reminder, the usual reminder to please subscribe to us if you've not done that already. If you're a first-time listener, wherever you're getting your podcast, download every episode. And regardless of whether you use iTunes, please head over there, search Hardwood Knocks, throw us that 5-star rating, write a review. They help us out a ton. I cannot stress that enough. And such a small fraction of people who listen to this podcast relative to our downloads every single episode have done so. I'm not trying to pester you, but it could really help us out. So please do that. Without further delay, though, let's talk some Cleveland Cavaliers, or everything Cleveland Cavaliers, with Justin Rowan. And then we'll move on to everything and anything San Antonio Spurs with Paul Garcia. Justin, welcome back to the Hardwood Knocks podcast. I haven't spoken with you. We did a Blue Wire podcast together like over a year ago, but I'm pretty sure we've not done a Hardwood Knocks episode together in probably closer to 2 years. We are on Skype. As you said, it feels like it's 2015. How are you doing?
I'm doing well, man. Thank you so much for having me back. Always down to talk with you. And you know what? I'm glad that we waited a little bit to talk some Cavs, because I think there's a little bit more reasons for legitimate optimism when it comes to the Cavs right now than there would have been if we talked over the last 2 years.
Yeah, so I have like a super rambly looking spreadsheet where I highlighted the teams, certain teams I wanted to make sure I talked about before the season actually started, because there's just, with the offseason we had, there was no way I was going to get to every single preview. And I highlighted teams that I thought were neglected on this podcast over the past year. And the Cavs, the Bulls, and the Wizards were like the ones that I singled out. And I just feel like we didn't talk about them enough. And they did have like some dysfunction going on last season, but they are legitimately a team. I'm not even just saying this because you're on the podcast. They're one of the teams I'm more curious about. I feel like I just don't have a feel for very much. And those are among my favorite teams to talk about because I become inherently more curious about them then.
Yeah, they're in a funny position right now where 3 straight years, I get a lot of kind of draft feedback of, well, I really like this player, but it's a shame they got drafted by the Cavs. And if you do that enough years in a row, I think eventually you start becoming a better team. So that is one of my kind of outsider signs that at least they're kind of on the right track. I think there is, if you're not in the championship or bust mentality, because I still don't think this is a playoff team, but if you are interested in kind of young talent and team building, I think the Cavs are kind of trending in an interesting direction.
Well, they have like stuff now, and I have like, I think 5 players listed before I even ask you a Kevin Love trade question. So that's like, that's got to be some sort of a record. I'll start with Okoro, and I had listened back to the live draft episode of the Chase Down, which I believe you were not on. Carter seemed to like the pick insofar that it made him money because he bet that that's where Okoro was going. What did you think of that pick? Because it feels like he's exactly what they need on defense. I'm just curious as to how you view his fit on offense, assuming, of course, that the video they posted of him hitting an off-the-dribble jumper to win a scrimmage the other day is not like just the standard for him.
Yeah, I really like the pick. So my number one guy in the draft was Okongwu. I think there were some concerns with his health, and also it kind of seems like small forwards in today's NBA are one of the toughest things to find elite talent at. Like that's a position where it's just scarce. So I think when you have a high pick, there's a mindset that you got to go with a wing player if there is one available. And Okoro to me was my favorite wing prospect in this draft. I think from the defensive perspective, like it makes a ton of sense why you bring him in. This is a guy that already has a man's body. He can defend 1 through 4. I think team defense is going to take a little while, as it always does with young players. But I think at point of attack, he's going to bring them something that they haven't had before, which I think really opens up a lot of possibilities. On the offensive side, he's a very intelligent player. I think he's an underrated passer, good finisher around the rim, moves well without the ball, which is something that's good to have when you have a lot of ball-dominant players. As far as the jump shot goes, there was optimism about that after his workout. He himself said that his jumper in college was probably a C, and he got it up to a B+. I'm not going to buy into that to that extent, but the mechanics are a whole lot cleaner. And from what we've heard out of camp, we just podcasted with Larry Nance last week, and he was talking about just how frequent, like he's not scared to take shots. Like he is someone that is going to take step back shots. He's going to take a lot of jump shots, and he's confident that not only is he going to be a good shooter, but eventually he's going to develop into a very good shooter. So there's optimism that if he can at least be at, like, let's say 35%, that's going to open up the other aspects of his offensive game. But the outside shot is probably going to be kind of the make or break aspect of his game when it comes to year one impact.
Yeah, and I don't know if it makes it easier, because there are some guys where it feels like they might be better with the ball in their hands of like working on their jump shot. But if he's having the ball in his hand less than he would have at Auburn, you feel like that would probably almost at least help him a little bit, because he shot like 16% on 2-point jumpers last year, I believe, off the dribble there. So like that's just, I don't know if you want to overburden him. But my question is, like, this team, so they're clearly they're about their youth. So are they going to give him like a longer leash this season to go through the motions? Is there a chance that, you do have Dylan Windler, you have Cedi Osman, but he's like kind of their only true wing at the moment? Is there a chance that maybe he even starts for most of this year?
I don't think he starts to start the year. It's such a quick turnaround from the draft, and JB Bickerstaff really is preaching accountability. It's something we saw as soon as he took over last season, where he was not afraid to bench Kevin Love or Tristan Thompson if they weren't performing well at the end of games, and did the same thing with Darius Garland and Collin Sexton. They're in a unique situation where their front court players are experienced, but those guys are reliant on the young guys to produce for them. And I think there's going to be a lot of internal competition among the young players. So I think Okoro, just everything I've heard about his work ethic and that, I think he's going to be in the mix for real minutes. But to start the season, I can see either Cedi Osman or Dylan Windler kind of getting that starting nod. Windler, even though he didn't play last year, he was around the team. He has more familiarity. He's practiced with them more. So I think he's going to be in the mix there. But I do foresee Okoro getting minutes because he just brings something that these other guys don't bring to the table.
One of the things I missed during this long hiatus was your Twitter feed updates on Collin Sexton's season splits. You've been driving that bandwagon, and I feel like I've seen them retweeted into my feed a little bit more the past couple weeks. I don't know if that's you or other people, but is he like overlooked at this point? Because we can focus on what he like still needs to work on, but the dude scored over 20 points per game on real efficiency last year, better than 50% on twos, over 38%, or right exactly at 38% on threes. And I'd sent you the note was just like only Chris Middleton, Brandon Ingram, Jaylen Brown, and Damyean Lillard were the other players to just match those splits. And so, no, I'm not saying he is those guys, but like, why? Like, it feels like there might be a building block there for the Cavs. Is there one? And why are people just nationally like so down on them? Is this just a matter of, well, you don't watch the Cavs enough, or we're focusing too much on what he can't do, or maybe you don't trust him to create for himself off the dribble, or obviously his passing's just, closer to Jordan Clarkson than it's going to be to like a Donovan Mitchell at this point?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, and I think there's a lot of valid criticisms there. I think when you see guys that are scoring on bad teams, a lot of times people will wonder if that's just empty stats, if it's empty calories. Someone has to go get the points. And I think there's some of that with Collin Sexton. But at the same time, when you're talking about this kind of volume, it means something. He was the number one option on the team. And as you mentioned, the split I love to mention is after the Jordan Clarkson trade, because that was a vote of confidence both in Collin Sexton and Kevin Porter Jr. that, hey, you can handle more usage. And it was 46 games. So that's not an insignificant sample size where it's 23.5 points, 3.4 assists,
Right.
49% from the floor, 43% from three, and a 59 true shooting percentage. For the year, he scored more points on higher efficiency than Jamal Murray last season. Like, I do think that there is potential there, but his playmaking, I don't think it's ever going to get beyond kind of combo guard levels. If he can be in that 3 to 4 range, I'm happy with that. He needs to recognize open guys. I don't think he can pass guys open, but as the season progressed, he was getting a little smarter at finding guys. Where it's going to come is on the defensive end, because that was one of the things that he was somewhat known for in Alabama. He has a 6'8" wingspan. He has the length to make up for what he lacks in size. And that's why I do make a bit of a Donovan Mitchell comparison, because their numbers at that same age are very, very similar. Obviously, Mitchell has taken 2 leaps since then. And it'd be silly to expect Sexton to do that. But if Sexton can commit himself to the defensive end, and especially with other guys able to kind of help out on offense this year, I do think that there is a potential building block there. I do think that the scoring is special. And if you add defense to that, you're going to live with combo guard passing because there's going to be other guys that can provide that for you.
Right. I mean, if you don't view him as like the floor general, let's say, he had a 20% assist rate post All-Star break. And so like that's for a combo guard, that's fine. What's really, you mentioned Donovan Mitchell. What's funny is that both of these guys were like, yeah, they were known for their offense coming out of college, but their defense was touted, and they've just both so far outstripped anything they've done defensively at the NBA level, like on offense. It's funny. What are you more hopeful for on him improving upon like this season or even long term, where you can mention the passing, but there's also the tendency where it feels like his game like stalls out before the rim, and then there still is a ways to go on. Like, I think what's really good about him is he can really stroke it on those like catch and shoot threes. But do you trust him to up the volume or take more, like create for himself and hit a higher clip of his off the dribble jumpers? And so just from those 3 elements, like what are you more optimistic about his improving, just moving aside from obviously what you just talked about defensively?
Yeah, I'm optimistic about him getting to the rim. He has added just a ridiculous amount of muscle this year. He looks like a freaking tank. Like he's kind of got that Marcus Smart work ethic, and that was a big thing that the Cavs were attracted to him by. And same thing with Isaac Okoro. The Cavs shooting staff, I feel confident in his jumper at this point. It's part of the reason why I really like the Okoro fit, because the Cavs have turned around the jump shot of Collin Sexton, Cedi Osman, Larry Nance Jr. Even Tristan Thompson was hitting threes, although I won't rush to use him as an example. But they got good player development staff. And I think Sexton's ability to get to the rim, draw more fouls, that's really you're going to see more of that this season. Basketball Index, I think they had Sexton in the 85th percentile finishing at the rim, which he was getting blocked a lot and started to make some adjustments, and he really wanted to work on his finishing. So if he's getting to the rim, drawing fouls, I think his efficiency is going to go up. But more than anything, I really want to see the growth on the defensive end, because I think that's going to be the difference maker. And people will mention Portland as a comp for the Garland-Sexton backcourt. I really like to think of it more as the Conley-Mitchell comp, because Mitchell is a good comparison for Sexton physically. Like, they're both 6'1", big wingspan. They were known for similar things, and the numbers are so similar that, okay, you're probably not going to be the scorer Mitchell is, but you can be a very good scorer. And if you're contributing on the defensive end, hey, we got something there. That it makes it a whole lot easier to give you serious minutes if we're trying to win.
Kevin Porter Jr., I think became like I don't want to say like the most interesting, but people seemed more and more intrigued in him as the year went on, where like there was talk, it felt like, could he be the best of like the three main prospects that were there of Garland, Sexton, and KPJ. Absolutely unleashed before his knee injury under Bickerstaff. I think when I was looking for this, I think he shot like 35 or 36% on off the dribble threes during that time, which is just huge to have that level of creation. What is like, does he, of the three players, does he have the highest ceiling as like a self-creator off the dribble? And just like, what is, once he's like, what is the role for him this season that you envision this team trying to carve out for him?
Yeah, so I think he does have the highest upside. The Cavs have communicated that they believe that he's the highest upside player that they have. He's probably the lowest floor as well. There are obviously off the court concerns. I'm not sure if you're familiar, but crashed his vehicle, fell asleep at the wheel, and had a gun in the vehicle. Also had an assault situation as well, although there were no charges pressed. But knowing that, and knowing the Cavs are really emphasizing trying to develop culture and accountability, I think he's going to have a bit of a road to kind of work his way back into the trust of the coaching staff. Coming into this season, what they anticipate doing with him is having him come off the bench and kind of being that OKC Harden, get more reps initiating the offense from the bench, right? Because you're not going to get those same type of looks if you're in the starting five, just by the nature of this team. So, hey, you're going to get more looks off the bench. You're going to get a run a bit of the offense. Maybe you're playing alongside Dante Exum, who can help assist you there as well. So I do still expect that he's going to have a good season. He had a good offseason before those issues came up, but it's going to be a bit of a journey for him to try to earn back the trust of the coaching staff and earn those minutes, because it's hard to not be a little disappointed with the way that this offseason went.
Yeah, and they didn't even like, he was with the team. I mean, he wasn't with the team, but then all of a sudden he was, but nothing's actually been resolved. And so like that was sort of weird, where it was like, well, what went into that decision making? Like, why was he like not there, and then now all of a sudden he is?
He was there, but he wasn't practicing. So I think that they've been handling things internally with him. I think there's probably some guidance that the team is providing him. I mean, you look at kind of the history of this team, and there's the unfortunate situation with Delonte West, and obviously these aren't apples to apples situations, but I think the organization, more than being upset and looking to punish, I think they also want to make sure that he does have the support structure and the guidance and look after him. So I wouldn't be surprised if that was part of kind of the rationale, that he's around the team, but they're trying to get him, bring him back in the right way and make sure that those support structures are in place. So I think that's probably more of it than him being missing like James Harden was.
Right. For him, are they going to be like more inclined to maybe keep him within the backcourt rotation now that you have Windler and Okoro and even Cedi Osman available? Or do you think that they still view what he's able to do on defense, where it did seem like he held up from the games that I watched, like again, against like certain actual sized wings? Is he still going to be playing plenty of three this year once he's fully reintegrated?
Yeah, I mean, he was listed at 6'4" last season. They have measured him. He's over 6'6" now, so he's firmly a wing. But I still think they view him long term as a shooting guard. He did play, I think, like 75% of his minutes last year at small forward, but that was kind of out of necessity. So I do see them using him in the kind of backcourt rotation. Even though Garland and Sexton are going to be starting together, I do see them kind of staggering minutes. Once JB Bickerstaff took over, those guys like Garland and Sexton played like 10 minutes together, and then they each played 15 minutes with Kevin Porter Jr. each without the other on the floor. And I kind of anticipate more of that. I think they're going to try to play around with a lot of different combinations to see what works. When it comes to those young guys, I really think the approach they're going to have is, you guys are getting your 27 minutes a night, but if you want to get more than that, you're going to have to at least attempt to do the right things. Not necessarily play well, but take the right shots, make the right passes, contribute on the defensive end. Otherwise, you're not going to close. And that was the mentality JB Bickerstaff had when he took over. And that, from everything we've heard, they're going to continue with that this season.
Darius Garland is the player personally, or prospect personally on this roster that I have like sub-zero feel for at the moment. And so I think you look at his 3-point shooting, like relative to the volume, I think that's fantastic, like as a rookie. But like, what do you envision for the rest of his game? What are you looking for from him this year? Did it look like the game slowed down for him at all, like as the season wore on? Like, what is the skinny on Darius Garland?
Yeah, you look at the last 2 months and he was averaging about 14 and 5. I think it's important to note that he was not healthy last season, like at all. He had 2 surgeries in the off season. He wasn't there for training camp. He came midway through preseason. He didn't have his conditioning. He was still in like a high schooler's body. He just wasn't right, and the confidence wasn't there. The thing that impressed me was he is someone that can actually pass guys open. Like, he made good reads. He has good feel for the game. But with how tentative he was, it really made things difficult. Like, 14 and 5 is nice, but like you're looking at kind of DJ Augustine numbers at that point. I think there's a lot of optimism. He was kind of the standout star in the minicamp bubble that they had. Larry Nance Jr. said he was the best player there. Like, flat out was the best player there. And he's apparently only got better. He's put on 17 pounds of muscle, not the cliche 15. He put on an extra 2. He went the extra mile, Dan. But like, what I foresee is, okay, now that he's healthy, it kind of reminds me of Jamal Murray's rookie season in Denver, where he had the abdominal issue and he wasn't quite right. These are guys that, like, they're shooters. We know they can shoot. Their jumper is so pretty, that thing's going to go in. If he's assertive and he's able to actually create that offense for himself, I don't think it's unrealistic to see that 14 and 5 go to 17 and 7. Like, I think he can create more opportunities for other guys once he becomes a threat. So I'm really, really confident in Garland coming into this season. I personally think that he's a better prospect than Sexton. Although at this point, Sexton, after what he's actually accomplished in the NBA, that floor is pretty high. Like, I don't think his worst case scenario at this point is 6th man.
And I mean, for Garland, it feels like he should have the cleanest opportunity just of the 3, because like he is the only one of the 3 that you can envision being like that actual floor general, and the Cavs don't really.
He's the only point guard on the team.
I was about to say, who else is going to challenge him for that spot? Like, it's not Exum, it's not Delhi. Yeah, like. So if we're going with those, like, what's also weird about Garland too is, so we played 4 or 5 games in college before his torn meniscus. So like, he has that long layoff and then isn't in training camp with the Cavs, like, into his rookie season. Then he has this other huge layoff now, and it's an abbreviated training camp. So it's great that he's healthy and stuff, but like, that's a rough start. And it's other players are going through the same, but like, that's just a rough start to the career where he hasn't had like a regular offseason to just work at his game under normal circumstances. Like, yeah, he's healthy this offseason, and apparently, like I said, put on 17 pounds of muscle, but like, he couldn't do that in a regular setting, obviously, just because of the plague. So
he's still, it's going to take some time for him to get back to game speed. And I'm grateful, looking at the schedule, that there aren't a whole lot of other teams that they're playing right away that went through the bubble, because those teams are going to be rusty too. But he's got to figure out, hey, now that I'm more explosive, it's going to take a little while for me to calm myself down, to see the game a little bit slower and kind of manage the team, because that's what his responsibility is going to be. So it is going to be interesting, but I do think that he's well set up at this point to kind of change the perception of what he is, because I think he really kind of flew under the radar after being pretty highly touted coming into the draft.
My clickbait question of the podcast is, so having looked at these 4 prospects now, like, how would you rank them, like, looking at their long-term outlooks or even just importance to the team going forward?
Yeah, so I think if I can cheat on this question a little bit, I want to do kind of floor and upside. Okay. Because I think from a floor standpoint, I think Sexton is probably the highest floor on the team. Okoro, I'd go second, Garland, and then Kevin Porter Jr. Upside, probably KPJ and Okoro first, just because wings have a higher impact in today's NBA, and then Garland and Sexton after that. So I'm high on Sexton. I'm high on this group. It's actually kind of funny because I'm a big fan of the guys that they've picked. The only one I wasn't a fan of was Sexton. I hated the pick. I was really, really against it. And just over the last 2 years, he's really kind of swung me. And I'm like, especially when he started scoring at that level, I was like, okay, this is actually something that's noteworthy, and which I should probably recalibrate my thinking a little bit.
Yeah, I'd be interested to see if he has like another season like he just did. He's extension eligible after this year. I'd just be curious.
He's getting paid.
Yeah,
He's
to see what the number is, just because like those, like if you're going to shoot 38% from three and score 20 points a game, like you're going to get paid. Like it doesn't matter like what you're viewed on in just the lexicon of like player rankings or anything. Like you're just going to get paid.
Yeah, 100%. It's how he performs on defensive end is basically going to determine how nauseous I am at the deal, but he's going to get paid. The nice thing about him, and this is part of the draft philosophy that the Cavs have had, is Kobe Altman's very involved with Team USA. And a lot of these guys, kind of the tie-breaking decision maker was, hey, is this guy going to be someone that's going to be happy in Cleveland? Is this guy a hard worker? Sexton had a lot of praise as one of the hardest workers they've seen in the program. Same with Okoro. Darius Garland, they had a lot of intel on him because he went through Team USA, and these guys have relationships with each other. Garland and KPJ are close friends. Sexton and Okoro are close friends. Garland's close with everyone on the team. The nice thing about doing that is, one, you have more intel. You have a better sense of who they are as prospects through Team USA. The other part is, if you start hitting on like 2 or 3 of these picks, they're already friends with each other. They don't have to leave Cleveland to team up.
That's a good point.
Which is kind of, it's kind of a nice position to be in, and it makes an internal competition a little easier to have as well, because these guys are pushing each other and they're all kind of invested in each other's success while still kind of maintaining that competitive edge.
I will say, going back to that 2018 draft, I remember being happy the Cavs took him because I wanted the Knicks to take Mikal Bridges or Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. They took neither of them, so it doesn't really matter. And the Cavs ended up getting the better player. But I was just so unbelievably low on Sexton, and then just last year just completely flipped me on him. Like just that maintain that level.
Anyone but Sexton. I tweeted anyone but Sexton in brackets. It's going to be Sexton on that draft night. I really wanted Shai. I know he didn't want to work out for the Cavs and said he wouldn't play there. I still thought you should take him because, hey, Steph Curry said that to the Warriors and it kind of worked out as well. So these guys don't exactly have a lot of control. And I mean, he forced his way to LA and then he went to OKC. So the illusion of control is all you really have.
That's why I sort of laughed when, this is only tangentially related, but like teams weren't apparently picking Tyrese Halliburton because he wanted to go to the Kings. And I spoke with Greg Wissinger on the Kings podcast about this. If I were the Kings, I would question his decision making if that's what he was trying to do. Oh, I want to play for you. So I would have taken him anyway. So, but that is totally off topic here. Dylan Windler actually going to play this year after coming back from that fracture in his left leg. What can we expect from him? Are they going to bring him along super slowly? And what part of his game really interests you the most relative to the fit with the rest of this roster?
You can expect a rich man's Duncan Robinson. No, I'm kidding.
I thought it was you, and I can't remember. When he was in Summer League, I saw someone call him like Caucasian Jimmy Butler. And I couldn't remember who it was, and I laughed at that. And now
it definitely wasn't me. That's funny, though. Oh, man. I don't think they're going to bring him along too slowly. Like maybe some of the minutes are managed, but he is firmly in competition for the starting spot right now.
Oh, wow.
They're crazy high on him. He can shoot the living hell out of the ball. Probably the best shooter on the team. And when you can do that, you're going to get minutes because this is guy 6'7", really long wingspan, left-handed shooter with a high release point, can create his own shot. They're going to find minutes for him, and they seem to be pretty happy with kind of his positional defense as well. And he's an older player, 24 years old. So there is that aspect of the Duncan Robinson comp, where he's coming in a little bit later in his career, but,
except he'll be allowed to dribble, right?
Yeah. Yeah. JB Bickerstaff did mention that he might play some small ball four, with Larry Nance at the 5 as well. I think they're going to experiment with, freakishly big lineups where you have Love, Drummond, and Larry Nance at the 3. And I think you're going to have times where it's Okoro, Windler, Kevin Porter Jr., and maybe Garland with Nance. So I think he's going to play kind of primarily as a 3-2-4. But he's someone that they feel confident they can move him around in the lineup. And they're really high on him. Like I'm still not convinced he actually exists, so I'm looking forward to tomorrow. A bit of a running joke in Cavs Twitter that this guy doesn't exist, but we'll see. We'll see if the myth of Windler is all that it's cracked out to be.
I hope they play the super big lineups and the super small lineups back to back, just to really emphasize
hockey shifted up, and I mean they played that big lineup last year and somehow it worked. I know it was a small sample size, but they just absolutely annihilated teams, even in a small sample size. Like, that's absurd. Yeah, and when we had Nance on the podcast, he's like, "All right, yeah, like I shot tens of thousands of threes. Like he shot 35% on a good volume last year, and he's confident he can kind of build upon it. He's added some strength kind of below the waist, and he's ready to kind of contribute in different ways. So this is it's going to be an interesting season for sure.
So we're going to see some then Thon Maker or McCore, however he wants to pronounce. Is he going to roll out at the 2 and they'll just go 4 bigs with a small?
Why not? I'm going to be a little surprised if he makes the team. He is just on a training camp deal, and the Cavs probably want to maintain a roster spot. They might do what they did with Alfonso McKinney, where it's just a series of non-guaranteed deals. Bring him back, cut him, bring him back, cut him, bring him back. But I think they want to maintain a roster spot because in all likelihood they are going to be trading Andre Drummond at some point. They came close in the offseason, and they're going to try again at the deadline because he's a big expiring contract, and the Cavs are more than willing to help someone clear up cap space if they'll get assets. So I think Drummond is an asset play, and they want to maintain that roster flexibility because there's not a whole lot of 1-for-1 deals with Andre Drummond's contract.
No, what is he, 27.5 or 28? What does he have? Yeah. He's high. I am surprised Dwayne Casey didn't resign in Detroit after they let Maker walk. He was just intent upon playing him ahead of Christian Wood for so long. But so what does Cedi Osman now, what is his fit with the team long term? They did extend him, and he did shoot the ball well last year. But now I'm just looking at this roster, and it's not that he doesn't make sense, but I'm like, he really shouldn't be starting now, right? Like, I feel like he should just be coming off the bench when you're looking at all the other guys that are now on this team.
Yeah, I mean, Cedi was extended. His contract reflects that of an 8th man, which is what he is. But unfortunately, for the last 2 years, he's been their primary stopper on the perimeter, and I'll put that in air quotes. He's been overmatched, and I'm excited to see him in kind of a more manageable role. But when you kind of look at this, you got a lot of guys that are going to be playing perimeter minutes on this team, and they're going to have another lottery pick this year in all likelihood. And you look at this draft class, and it's all wings. I wouldn't be surprised if Cedi was kind of tied to either Kevin Love or Andre Drummond in a trade to kind of up the value there in a return. But other than that, while he's here, I see it kind of a similar role to what Windler has of, okay, you'll play a little 3-2-4. We'll maybe play him a little bit more at the 4 because he is a bit stronger and has more experience. But I think he's going to be able to contribute. He's going to be in the mix for starting at least at the start of the year until Okoro gets caught up on the playbook and is a little more comfortable. But long term, no, he's going to be a rotation player for this team. And yeah, I mean, he's a great depth piece to have, and I think a lot of teams would be happy to have him come off the bench, including Cleveland. But it's the fit's getting a little tricky when you have so many kind of young mouths that you want to get as many reps as possible.
And if they want to keep playing him at the 3, it feels like coming off the bench is just the better fit for him then, where he doesn't have to go up as heavily against starting caliber wings, which he's just not equipped to defend.
No. Poor guy.
So the question that I delayed as long as I could, what's happening with the Kevin Love situation this year? Is this the season they actually move him? In the interim, regardless of what happens, do you see him being more on board with the direction of this roster than he was last season? Because some of the stuff I think a lot of Cavs reporters pointed out was being dramatized, but it did feel like there was a level of he just didn't want to be there at some point, or at least didn't want to be under John Beilein. Maybe that was the primary issue there.
Yeah, I mean, there was frustration with him. There's been tons of frustration over the last 2 years. I think poor Collin Sexton was, and some of this was on him, but he was also a 19-year-old player. I don't think no matter who they drafted, Kevin Love was going to be happy because it's such a difference from going to the finals for 4 straight years. And I mentioned this earlier in the podcast, but you got veterans in the front court with Love, Drummond, and Nance. but those guys are reliant on the young guys to get them their touches, get them good looks, and they haven't been equipped to do that. And as the season progressed last year, whether it be the Bayline factor, whether it be Sexton and Garland playing better, it did become more manageable for Kevin Love. But I think you're not going to see as many outbursts because there's just more talent there. It's going to be a more enjoyable experience for him. But I think both sides would prefer to move on. I think Love himself has acknowledged that he had bad moments last year. He had moments where he lost his patience. He didn't keep his composure as a leader, and he owned up to that to his credit. Like, I think it's something that a lot of fans could emphasize with, because it wasn't the easiest season. So hopefully there's going to be less of that. I think ultimately it's going to come down to whether or not there is a offer with some value. I think the most likely time that he gets moved is next offseason.
Okay.
Because there's going to be teams that are going to strike out in free agency, and they're going to be looking to make a move, and there's going to be one less year on that contract.
Yep.
And I mean, you saw Al Horford move, and that contract's just as bad, if not worse. And the Cavs are going to manage him as well. They're not going to play him in back-to-backs. I think they have the same strategy with Andre Drummond, and I think part of that mentality is, hey, we want to maintain their health for a trade. Last year at the deadline, the best offers that were out there were basically expiring contracts for Love, and they don't want to just move him to get off the money. They want to at least get some value in return. So once a team comes up with that kind of an offer where they either get a young rotation player that's worth caring about to some extent, or a first round pick of some kind, they'll hang on to him.
Yeah, I mean, look, 2 years and $60.2 million is a lot different than 3 years, 91.5 on paper too. So that should be easier to move. It's also tough because right now, like and this was the case last season, you don't look at any one team and identify them as being one Kevin Love away from like really entering the title discussion right now. And I think a lot of that speaks to like just the direction of the NBA, where the stuff Kevin Love does is still super valuable. But if you play him at the 4, like you need a very specific type of 5. If you want to play him at the 5, you need a very specific type of like bunch of wing defenders around him. So I think that makes it difficult. So if you had to peg between him and Andre Drummond, you would say that Drummond's the one that's more likely to be moved this season?
Drummond's going to get traded. Drummond's 100% going to get traded. He's not. They discussed an extension with him to at least kind of get a sense, and credit to Evan Damyean at Forbes. He mentioned basically what the Cavs were offering overall was basically what Drummond was looking at over the course of a deal per year. So there was a massive gulf between what the Cavs thought he was worth and what he was expecting. So it's, I think that he's going to get moved. I think some team is going to see him A, as a rental for a couple months, and B, as a way to clear up $30 million in cap space for just a fantastic free agency class. Even if Giannis isn't in there, teams are going to want to kind of clear up that space. So I think there is going to be some market for Drummond, and I think ultimately it was an asset play for the Cavs. I think they wanted, I think they wanted to see what Drummond would look like for the final 20 years. They wanted to see what the guards would look like playing with a big like that, someone that they could use in the pick and roll a little more aggressively than Tristan Thompson. But then COVID cut those plans short. So, I mean, when you give up Brandon Knight and John Henson for Andre Drummond, as long as you get a better return for Andre Drummond than you would have got for those two guys at the trade deadline last year, the move worked out in the end because, I mean, the one nice thing about being a Cavs fan is Dan Gilbert's willing to pay the money. So why not take this opportunity?
I just remember when that trade broke and like it was broken without the details, and I didn't understand it. And then I was shocked that like that's what I knew his value wasn't high, but they got him for a second round pick and expirings. That's what it ended up being, right?
Yeah, it was John Henson, Brandon Knight, and a second round pick. And like earlier in that day, the conversation was, okay, maybe the Knicks are going to give up Ntilikina for John Henson. Like the discussion happened, but obviously the Knicks didn't want to go forward with that. But then all of a sudden it turned into Andre Drummond, which was surprising as hell.
Just as an aside, I would die for Frank Ntilikina, so I'm glad that I actually think he needs to be on a different team than a player.
I'd love to have Frankie Smokes on the team. I was really hoping that something would happen this summer.
And so I guess what you're getting at, though, is that the Cavs are willing to take back bad money, and that's where, you know, that trade has the Drummond trade specifically has the chance to be like even more worthwhile for them, is they wouldn't have had those other guys under contract now, and you have this salary magnet at the moment that if you're willing to take on long-term money at a time where, I would say already 2021 free agency is just looking less rosy when you have LeBron's already off the board, PG's off the board, Giannis could be off the board. Teams are still going to want, there's other good players there. And so if you're a team like Cleveland that's actually willing to take on money and isn't concerned with cap space that summer, my guess is at some point, and even it might just be a team that needs to save money because of like they're being just destroyed by the absence of revenue in the stands at the moment.
Yeah.
It feels like the Cavs could be set up. I don't know what they end up getting. It depends on how bad the contract is, but there are, there are a few, and not more than a few, pretty albatross deals out there at the moment.
Yeah. Yeah, and they had talks for Gordon Hayward, for Andre Drummond. That was reported that they discussed that. There was talk Nick Batum get involved in that trade somehow with Andre Drummond. Like there were options out there. They weren't able to get one done yet, but I now kind of foresee them going into the deadline where, hey, now there's half as much money on that contract, and now you can clear up some space. So, I mean, the flaws of Dan Gilbert are pretty well publicized, but the difference between Cleveland and a team like Indiana is if Cleveland gets good stuff, they're going to pay. Like, that Dan Gilbert's going to spend a lot of money, even on this bad team. Like, they got a lot of future picks because they were willing to take on so much bad money for expiring contracts. And now one of those picks turned into a 2022 unprotected pick from the Milwaukee Bucks. Giannis leaves. Hey, that pick gets interesting as hell. And that was just for George Hill. So the Cavs have shown a willingness to take on money, and by all reports, they are still willing to take on bad money. So they'll be in the mix for a lot of trades.
It would be funny if this ends with them trading Andre Drummond to get Gordon Hayward because Charlotte realizes they can't handle that contract they stretched Nick Batum for. So in the meantime, who plays a bigger role for this team? Is it going to be Nance or Drummond?
I think that's an interesting question. So I'm going to say Larry Nance, and the reason, even though he's going to be coming off the bench, he is now the vocal leader of this team. He's somebody that they really look up to. He's born and raised in Cleveland, loves the city, very active in the community. And I mean, until one of the young guys kind of steps up, he's kind of the face of the franchise at this point. Like, he is at least that vocal voice for the team. And with no Tristan Thompson, they need someone to step up. I think they learned from the mistakes of the post-decision rebuild by not having any adults in the room, and they've tried to emphasize that. That was part of the rationale of extending Kevin Love after LeBron left. That was part of why they paid Larry Nance. They wanted him to be that presence, and I think his versatility coming off the bench is really, really valuable. You look at PIPM last year, and Nance was the most impactful player on the team. The biggest thing for him was they stopped playing him at center, which I was screaming for. I was like, hey, this guy's going to have more impact once he's playing at power forward, which now it looks like he's going to be doing that primarily for the foreseeable future.
And look, if he's going to hit like 35% of his threes, like that's just an absolutely on actual volume. That's just a huge deal.
Yeah.
And,
no kidding.
And look, there's no such thing as like a real, basically off-limits player in this league. But as you kind of mentioned, since he's like this cultural touchstone for them now, is he someone that they probably really wouldn't be too open? I don't even want to say open, but like it feels like he's someone teams will want to target at the trade deadline if they're smart.
Well, they got so many offers for him in the offseason. Like every team was coming and calling about Larry Nance. And they're not eager to move him. They would kind of have to really be blown away to move on from him, both for on and off court reasons.
Do Damyean Dotson or Dante Exum, will either of those guys have a shot at sticking with this team, actual minutes this year? I like the Dotson pickup, another guy who with some questionable on off court history, but he holds up positionally on defense and he can hit threes. I thought, just from a pure basketball perspective, I thought it was wild the Knicks didn't give him a qualifying offer and that the Cavs were able to scoop them up like they did.
Yeah, that's a really nice depth piece. Like that can give you kind of that microwave bench score that also plays some defense. Like everybody they brought in this offseason plays defense. And I think you can read into that. They've been historically bad on that end. They believe in the internal growth, but they want guys that can contribute on that end. And if you're going to hold Garland, Kevin Porter Jr., and all these other guys accountable in defensive end, you need to have a rotation player on the bench that you can bench them for that's going to play defense. So I do think Exum and Dotson are going to be getting some minutes. I know they've been experimenting with 3-guard lineups with Exum kind of playing at the 3 a little bit. The question with him is going to be health. If he's healthy, he's going to play. If he's not, Dotson's going to play more, I guess.
And he's like, when Exum's been healthy, like he's been really good on defense. Everyone's gonna remember him shutting down James Harden, but like he can guard actual wings. I don't know. He's gonna give back like a lot on offense just because there's not a lot he could do there. But if he's healthy, now all of a sudden the Cavs like have these. I don't know if you want to call all of them high impact defenders, but just a bunch of guys who could defend, which is just something that like I don't think you could have said a few months ago.
You're not buying into Exum's offensive upside. Do you not remember his Cavs debut? 28 points. I'm not buying into it. I'm not buying.
I was going to say I do not remember his Cavs debut. I forgot. I think when I was going to this outline, I like remembered he was on the Cavs. That is my Dante Exum. That's the space he's occupying in my brain right now. So
I remember Jazz Twitter having a good laugh at him going to the Cavs and immediately scoring 28 points. I think he had like 4 threes or something stupid like that too. It was pretty funny.
Utah like believed in him, or he had something on GM Dennis Lindsey, because they just gave him like basically 3 years and $30 million when there could not have been a market for him like even within that realm.
Anytime the Jazz overpay a guard, he's going to Cleveland. That's the way this
so
works.
Clarkson's coming back, is what you're saying.
Yes, exactly.
So I know this will be matchup based, but if it's a close game, what do you envision being like their best or most used closing lineup?
All right, I'm going to answer this mid-season because I think it's going to take Okoro some time, but I do think that he's going to be in that lineup. I think it's going to be Garland, Sexton, Okoro, Love, Drummond. I think that's probably their best look. Maybe they end up going with Kevin Porter Jr. there, but you look at kind of the on-off numbers. KPJ and Sexton were just horrifically bad last year together. Like that pairing just sucked. They could not generate offense together, even though both of them are talented at generating individual offense. Whereas Garland and KPJ, I think that's something to keep an eye on, but they were a net positive together when Sexton wasn't on the floor, which it's not easy to find net positive pairings on last year's Cavaliers. But I'm a believer in both Garland and Sexton coming into the season. I think all the buzz, everything we've heard is that those two are looking really good and are dedicating themselves on the defensive end, because I don't know if you want to call Garland twice as good or if you want to call him half as bad. Probably half as bad is more accurate, but his defensive PIPM was half as bad as Sexton's, and his positional defense was good. Like he's got a wingspan. He was in the right spots. He just weighed like 170 pounds soaking wet and just like wasn't physically there. So if he's playing decent positional defense and Sexton's dedicated himself on that end, I can see what they bring on the offensive end being enough to earn them the kind of that closing role.
Is there, and you kind of already mentioned this when you talked about playing Larry Nance with 4 smalls, but is there like a quirky lineup aside from the 3 big combination that you're hoping they test out at any point this season?
I think any quirky lineup has to include the man of mystery, Dylan Windler. So let's go with Nance and Windler as the 2 quote unquote bigs. Let's throw Okoro, Kevin Porter Jr., and Garland. I think that's a fun, weird lineup. So Garland, KPJ, Okoro, Windler, and Nance. I think that could be a lot of fun.
I would pick that same one, but have Sexton in for Garland. I don't know if you have enough playmaking.
That would also be fun.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a whole lot of secondary playmakers at that point. Like even Larry Nance is a pretty good passer for a big man. So it'd be interesting to see how that works. But yeah, that's either of those lineups could be a lot of fun.
Factoring in whatever you want, like whether it's big additions or subtractions, does this end with them giving up every one we just talked about for James Harden? But whatever, factoring in whatever, what's a realistic win total for this team this year?
So I'm hoping this season, like I think they're going to be around 25 to kind of high 20s wins. I am optimistic. I think it's going to fall off a little bit after they trade Drummond. Just because you're probably going to become a worse team at that point, even though you could probably debate Andre Drummond's impact. But I think the goal for this season is, okay, you're creating some accountability. You're developing better habits. You're learning how to win. I think this is a team that's going to be competitive in a lot of games, but not yet know how to close them out. And hopefully, I mean, you do that and the young guys kind of iron out some of those bad habits this year. You go into the draft with another high pick, maybe get some lottery luck. You have cap space, probably, depending on what happens with Andre Drummond, but you'll at least have enough to kind of fill out the roster. And who knows, maybe then you do what Atlanta did, only at the appropriate time in your rebuilding arc, and make a run for the playoffs the following season. Like, I think the goal for this year shouldn't be routing and wins. It should be, is this viewed as a young up-and-coming team with promise? Or are the young guys establishing themselves as good young players? And if they can do that, I think the future can be decent enough for Cleveland.
If I set the over-under on the number of teams with a worse record in the East than the Cavs this year at 2.5, are you taking the over or the under?
Oh my God, that's tough. I'm taking the over, but not by much. It'd make me a little bit nervous. I think they're probably going to be a bottom 5 team in the league, but that's probably third worst in the East.
Might be fourth worst in the East at this point. Who knows?
Yeah, as long as they're bottom 7, though, the lottery odds are flat enough that I'm comfortable with it. So that's kind of where I foresee them being. But hey, if they overachieve, like if they go out there and they're better than even my optimistic projections, I'm not going to be mad at that, because like you look at the final 8 in last year's playoffs, and these are teams that built from the middle. They relied on player development. They didn't have a lot of high picks. I think right now there's more talent coming into the NBA than there's ever has been, and the emphasis has to be on player development and culture. You're not going to get bailed out by high lottery picks. So I'm not in a position to complain, because if you're winning when you're relying on these young guys to initiate so much of the offense, that probably means at least one of them is a building block.
It only makes sense to get mad if they overachieve because they've left like Kevin Porter Jr., Collin Sexton, Okoro, and like they're not playing the young guys. Like that's when getting angry makes sense. But if it's the young guys who are overachieving, then there's no, like you should. That's actually
Drummond's
encouraging.
dropping 30 and 20, loves playing like he did in Minnesota, and they traded for Chris Paul, and that's why they're winning. I'd be a little bit upset, but if it's the young guys, I'm going to be okay with that.
Anything I didn't ask you that you want to cover? Anything that's just maybe nationally under-recognized about this squad? Did you have any strong Thon Maker takes that you needed to get off right now that you didn't already get off before?
No, I'm just going to go back to that word accountability, because I mean, we were laughing about it when we did our podcast with Larry Nance. It came up a million times because that's what they're trying to drill into people's heads. And I think I would be crazy. I mean, I am crazy, but I'd be crazy if I didn't understand that it's going to take, even among Cavs fans, it's going to take actually showing that for people to buy in. Like, this team needs to create a positive identity that isn't tied to LeBron James. I think that they've done the right decision making. Like, the Okoro pick was really encouraging, because you had the guy that might have sold tickets that played in Ohio in Obi Toppin. You had Dan Gilbert's favorite player in the draft, apparently, in Denny Avdia. And they went with kind of the strong culture fit, the guy that has a crazy work ethic that Kobe Altman knew from Team USA. They're doing the right things. Just because you have the right process doesn't mean it's going to work out. Some of these guys are going to bust in all likelihood. But whether or not they can actually kind of turn the perception of this franchise around is going to be really, really interesting to me. And it's interesting too, because I mean, it's tied to the whole identity of the city. Like, the city has been experiencing a boom there. They're like, I went there last year with my wife. She had never been. She isn't online, so she doesn't even know that Cleveland isn't supposed to be a nice place. And
she's not online. That sounds like a keeper.
Yeah, it's great. I mean, she's only online on YouTube, so that there's not a whole lot of Cleveland references there outside of the Cleveland tourism video. But it's an interesting place to be, because you're not yet at the place where you have legitimate expectations, but there are some expectations because you have so much young talent. So I think it's going to be interesting to see whether or not they can make some headway when it comes to turning around the perception of this franchise.
And I guess there's just a matter of, like, they still do need to kind of find their blue chip cornerstone. Like, maybe it's Collin Sexton, maybe it's Garland, maybe it's Kevin Porter Jr. I think they have enough talent.
Maybe it's Cade Cunningham.
Yeah, there you go.
Like,
because they have enough
Things
talent
get
to
really
look at.
interesting if
Right.
things work out and they get the lottery luck. Because I think people forget when they won the Andrew Wiggins lottery, they won like 35 games and they went 500 after the Bynum trade. Like, I would love for one of those seasons where you have that late boom and then you get the lottery luck. They've kind of got the. I know they're the last team that can ever complain about lottery luck, but they've got the shit end of the stick the last few years with the new odds. So it'd be nice to see a little bit of basketball karma rewarded, because you add Cade to this mix. If these guys are fun, and look out.
The challenge for them, because it does feel like, just from afar, that they've done at least nothing has been malpractice at this point, but you don't want to get to a point where you don't feel like you've had to stomach a lot of losses and yet you still don't have that blue chip cornerstone. And if they don't get that next year's draft, like say they slide down, like if they have like 8 or 9, and that might be considered blue chip in this draft. Everyone's like over the moon about it. But if they don't have that player, like that's where you worry about them sort of short circuiting what's happening now in favor of making the win now play that sets them back without really doing anything meaningful for their needle.
Yeah. They haven't done that kind of typical Cavs win now move. And I mean, you'd really hope that someone emerges that you're like, hey, this is a blue chip guy. Like you came internally and holy crap, like they just made the leap this season. That would be ideal. But I mean, in all likelihood, all you can really do is like focus on player development, and maybe you consolidate the players you have. Like you might not have a blue chip, but maybe you have an all-star and another promising starter that you can consolidate for a young blue chip prospect. So I think, especially with the new lottery odds, all you can really focus on is player development these days.
Justin, this was great. Thank you for giving me so much of your time. If you guys are not following Justin on Twitter, he's at Cavsanada. That's at CAVSANADA. He is the co-host of the Chase Down Pod, and he also writes gambling things at Bodog Canada. Justin, thanks again for coming on, and rest assured I'll be pestering you again in the future, and it probably will be in fewer than 2 years, I believe.
Hopefully the Cavs can get relevant enough for you to invite me back. Always appreciate you having me on that.